Ahoy there, Captain Benzie here, coming at you with a very special episode of the Destroyer Pilot's Manifesto, the series that aims to teach you everything there is to know about the various different destroyers in EVE Echoes. Now today I thought it would be fun to have a look at the Yan Jung Destroyer, not the prototype, the actual XIAN-YUE Destroyer itself. Now this of course means one of two things. First of all, I am on the Fulmination test server, and when I'm on the Fulmination Content Creator test server, that gives me access to full level 5 skills in everything there is in the entirety of EVE Echoes, so do bear that in mind when you're having a look at some of the stats and attributes as we come to them later. It also means I of course have access to ships and modules that otherwise are not available on the live server, like for example, the XIAN-YUE Destroyer here. We do not know how or when you will be able to get this ship on live. I will let you guys know as soon as I know. Seriously, if you're not already subscribed to this channel, if you're not already following me on Twitter, etc., do make sure that you are, especially if you want to know about things like the Yan Jung, Mordu's Legion, and Sisters of Eve, because literally the second I know anything about any of those three factions, I'm going to be shouting it from the rooftops, so if you want to be the first to know, that's how you do it. Secondarily, I'm saying XIAN-YUE Destroyer. I'm hoping I'm getting that as close as possible in approximation to how I've heard the developers say this in various different interviews. This may not be perfect, it may not be entirely correct. I'm a native English speaker, I don't actually speak Mandarin Chinese. I would love to learn, I just haven't had the time and capability to sit down and actually do so yet. As such, please just appreciate that I'm making the effort to say it as close to it as I can, and not going XIAN-YUE or something like that. And please don't absolutely berate me in the comments for my pronunciation. Anyway, if you do enjoy this video, let me know by hitting a like on it, sub to the channel for all things EVE Echoes, ding that notification bell to never miss an upload, and of course, let me know in the comment section down below what ships and what topics you want me to talk about in future content. Finally as well, if you do want to go the extra mile to help support this channel, you can do so by joining me either on Patreon, details are on screen now and it is undergoing a full revamp soon, plus we have a merchandise store on Redbubble, so if you've ever fancied representing the Catskull Cartel, Catskull Academy, or just anything Captain Benzie on something like a hoodie, a t-shirt, a notepad, stickers, that kind of thing, do check that out. Anyway, that said and done then, let's talk about the XIAN-YUE Destroyer. Now actually, before we jump into talking about the XIAN-YUE Destroyer itself, I think it's worth spending a bit of time just looking at Decomposers and what these are and what they do. Now basically, Decomposers are the Yan Jung exclusive weapon, and by exclusive weapon I mean that the Yan Jung ships have bonuses to Decomposers, and no other ship in the game gets bonuses to Decomposers. Well, except things like the Celestis that gets bonuses to turrets, which does actually affect Decomposers, but what I mean is, you know, there's no other ship in the game that says small Decomposers or medium Decomposers explicitly, other than the Yan Jung ships. Anyway, if you've been doing the daily login rewards as an Omega on your first month, you will of course have received some returned small Jetstream Decomposers, so you'll have some of these, and you've probably already fit them to your XIAN-YUE prototype. What we're going to do here is actually have a look at what these weapons are, how they work, and how they compare against other weapon systems of a similar meta level. Now first of all, Decomposer's damage types. You'll see here that it's majorly into kinetic, with quite a good amount of explosive on the side. The closest thing we have to this is either autocannons, which are otherwise more explosive and with a bit of thermal and kinetic, or we have of course railguns. Railguns use a lot of kinetic, but they do have thermal rather than explosive, so it is a unique damage profile here on the Decomposer, mainly kinetic, little bit of explosive on the side, which means these are very good at punching through armor and hull, which don't tend to have very good resistances against either kinetic or explosive damage, but it does suffer a little bit against shield tanking, as of course they do have good resistances against explosive and kinetic damage, and are weaker more to thermal and electromagnetic, which the Decomposer does not do. Now as we go further down and actually have a look at the stats here, power grid requirement, you'll see that Decomposers are actually very power grid hungry. 11 megawatts is right up there. That is the second most expensive power grid on any small turret at meta level 5, that is. It's beaten only by the Mace beam laser, which is a 12 megawatt requirement. Other than that, even the Jolt strike cannon is only 10 megawatts, so these things really do chew up your power grid. As we go down, activation cost, 8.9 gigajoules. This again is huge. This is the amount of capacitor it takes to fire a Decomposer every time they cycle. 8.9 gigajoules is pretty large. As a comparison, if we look again at the longbow pulse laser, that uses 3.5 gigajoules per activation, and the mace beam laser uses 6.3. If you were to look at either the dealer snub-nosed or the musket rifled, you'll see those are 1.1 and 1.5 respectively, just to showcase quite how power grid hungry and capacitor hungry the small decomposers actually are as a system. Now, that activation time of 7.5 seconds is kind of middling. That's slower than any of the small range, so it's smaller than torpedoes, it's smaller than snub-nosed pulse lasers or autocannons, but it is considerably faster than strike cannons, or indeed missiles. It's actually still slower than beam lasers and rifled railguns for the most part, but it's, you know, it's still faster than the real long-range versions, and these do have a sort of range to them, I guess, which is what we're going to look at next here. Optimal range of 10.8 kilometers. Now, as far as optimal ranges go, that's pretty good. Again, that is only beaten by the mace beam laser at 11 kilometers, and I suppose theoretically the Gallows missile launcher at 15 kilometers with an optimal range. But you'll notice here that small jet stream decomposers do not have an accuracy fall-off. No, accuracy fall-off means you are either in range or you are not in range, like missiles. Now, this means that they do theoretically have shorter range not only than the Gallows missile and the mace beam laser, but they do actually have shorter range than the Jolt strike cannon, quite considerably, and I believe actually off the top of my head, looking at it, the musket rifled railgun is significantly longer range as well. Yeah, it's accuracy fall off of 5, so that's 14 kilometers at 15%. And all the way out to 18 kilometers theoretically. It does mean, you know, they're pretty good as far as doing damage at 10.8 kilometers. At 10 kilometers, they are one of the higher damaging, you know, they're within the optimal range. As I said, the only other weapons that have an optimal range of 10 kilometers or higher are the mace beam laser and the Gallows missile at 11 and 15 kilometers. So there is that, and these definitely are higher DPS than the mace beam laser. Maces, I think, come in at 19.46, so it's higher here from the Jetstream Decomposer. Finally then, tracking speed, 118. This is actually a very low tracking speed. By comparison, musket rifled railguns are 116, mace beam lasers are 129, and Jolt strike cannons are 109. So it's very close to the long range versions without actually having the range that comes with those. On the other hand, if you're looking at something like an autocannon or a longbow pulse laser, or even the dealer snub-nosed railguns, those are 410, 384, and 550 respectively. So it's very slow tracking as far as small turrets go, and it doesn't quite have the range to handle that. You do theoretically want to be sitting right on the edge of that 10-kilometer range here when you're using the Decomposers, simply because of how the tracking speed works and how low that actually is. This means that actually Decomposers kind of have the feel of missiles. They've got that kind of long range to them. You don't worry about whether or not you're in how you are in accuracy fall-off, you just have a maximum range to work with, and if you're in that, you kind of want to be sitting as close to the maximum as possible to get the very most out of them. Now, if we're to compare the Returned here to the higher meta level version of The Departed, again, these, we don't know how you get these on live, how, when, etc. These will all be added, but this is the meta level up. This is the equivalent of something like a Republic fleet missile launcher, or a Caldari Navy railgun, that kind of thing. What we're looking at here is what has changed between the levels, and as you look, obviously damage increases. DPS has gone up from 21.16 up to 22.78. But the power grid goes up as well. Instead of an 11 megawatts power grid, it's now 12, plus the activation cost has gone from 8.9 to 9.1. Other than that, though, the optimal range remains the same, the tracking speed remains the same, activation time, etc. remains the same. So basically, as they go up in meta level, Decomposers increase the amount of power grid they require, they increase the amount of capacitor they require, but do increase the damage. It's just range and tracking do not change. Staying on the subject of decomposers, I just wanted to jump into the skill tree and talk about the different decomposer skills and how these affect the weapon. So if we go into weapon technology, down to decomposer here at the bottom, you'll see that like the other weapon systems, they have two different skill trees. You've got what in the others is referred to as like small laser operation, and you've got small laser upgrade. Here you have small decomposer command and small decomposer upgrade. I have no idea why it's decomposer command, not decomposer operation. Honestly, I do hope they change that. It's not exactly a vital change by any stretch, but there's just a part of me that likes it all being operation and upgrade just for clarity purposes. Now, if we have a look at small decomposer command, which is basically small decomposer operation, you'll see that like the other operations, small laser operation, small cannon operation, small railgun operation, etc., what these do is this increases the decomposer's damage by 20%, whilst increasing the tracking speed by 10%. This means that if you are in sort of closer range, you are getting boosts there to the amount of tracking speed that is required to, help you actually stay on target. This is very similar to the operation skills from the other weapons. Once you move into advanced small decomposer command, same kind of thing. You're still getting that increase in damage, you're still getting that increase in tracking speed, but now you're also getting an increase to the duration of the activation time of a macro particle stabilizer. This is kind of the decomposer's weapon upgrade module. Kind of like a gyro stabilizer, a heat sink, that kind of thing. You're getting additional activation time there for having this skill trained, 2 seconds for having this trained all the way up to level 5. Once you hit expert small decomposer command, same kind of thing, you're getting that additional tracking speed, additional damage, and additional macro particle stabilizer activation time. 4 seconds now. If you've trained all the way up to expert small decomposer 5, you'll have 4 seconds additional macro particle stabilizer activation time, alongside all that extra damage and tracking speed. The upgrade side of this tree is, as you would expect, again, very similar to lasers, cannons, missiles, that kind of thing here. What you're getting here is bonus damage, but not quite as much damage as the operations tree would give, plus an increase to range. Now, obviously, there's no accuracy fall off here with small decomposers, so it is just optimal range that gets an increase here. 10% extra range. Very, very useful. You've seen how short range the decomposers can be. Adding extra range to them really does help. And as we get, again, once we go into advanced, we're still getting damage, we're still getting optimal range. Now we're getting macro particle stabilizer activation time, and same at expert small decomposer upgrade. Macro particle stabilizer activation time, small decomposer optimal range, and small decomposer damage. Not getting as much damage out of the upgrade tree as you are out of the command tree, but you do get those bonuses to range, which I do honestly think is equally as important. Now, if you're just using the XIAN-YUE Destroyer, the prototype version, I don't really recommend training into these skills all that much, and at this point in time, I just don't. Simply put, I just don't recommend training them, because they don't affect any ship that you can actively get in the game. The prototype doesn't get any direct bonus. If you look at the prototype's ship stats and fittings and roll bonuses and all of that, it does not actually have any skill bonuses, it's only roll bonuses, so it doesn't matter how much you train a Decomposer upgrade, it doesn't affect the XIAN-YUE prototype. What it does do is, of course, affects the damage that the turrets themselves do. That's all very well and good, but those turrets are limited. You can only get those via logging into the game, and in that first month using your Omega subscription daily login rewards. That's how you get more of those. There's no way in-game to actually get those. If you're buying them off the market, you're buying them from someone who has essentially done those login rewards, decided they don't want the Decomposers, and is willing to sell them, which means there is a finite supply of these things. And when they run out, if they run out before we know how you get replacements, before the Yan Jung Faction is properly added into EVE Echoes, you're kind of stuffed. So I do recommend leaving those skills until such time as the XIAN-YUE Destroyer itself does become available. Anyway, that said and done then, I think it is actually now time to talk about the XIAN-YUE Destroyer itself. The Yan Jung are one of the special factions available in EVE Echoes. Now, like the Sisters of Eve and Mordu's Legion, they're often mistakenly referred to as pirate factions. They're not pirate factions, which is why I quite like the fact they've redesigned the ship tree screen here to have all of the pirate factions down the right-hand side, all of the Empire factions in the middle, and all of the special factions here on the left-hand side. They are not pirates. Now, the Yan Jung ships are actually exclusive to EVE Echoes. You can fly around EVE Online as much as you like, you will never spot any of these ships in EVE Online, but they're not a fabrication for EVE Echoes. I know a lot of people have sort of accused the developers, obviously NetEase being a Chinese company, of sitting there and saying, well, they've added their own faction, which is of course Chinese in nature, just to this game. No, they haven't. The Yan Jung have been around in EVE Online for a very long time and are actually possibly even older than the Jove themselves. It's theorized that the Yan Jung may have actually been the first settlers into the New Eden cluster. According to Sebastian Mathon, the Yan Jung nation immigrated into New Eden through the Eve Gate and settled in the Deltol system, especially on Deltol 5 and Deltol 6, which seemed to have been much more inhabitable back then. The Yan Jung were, judging from the remains of Yan Jung technology found in the archaeological record, masters of advanced gravitronic technology and force field theories. Yan Jung archaeological sites can be found in EVE Online in the Algental constellation within Galente Federation space, and you can actually do some missions for Sebastian Mathon if you don't believe what I'm saying there. Go look it up, you'll start to learn a bit more about the Yan Jung in the background, and I can't wait to see how these are implemented and added into EVE Echoes. Now, of course, this is the point where I'd normally tell you that you need to go to a certain area and do dead space anomalies to get yourself debris that you use to reverse engineer. You can't do that for the Yan Jung. We don't know how we're going to make these ships yet. Simply put, like Mordu's Legion, like Sisters of Eve, Yan Jung just simply are not available currently in EVE Echoes on live at the time of me making this video, which is January 7th, 2021, just in case something changes in the next couple of days. Anyway, so the XIAN-YUE Destroyer, let's actually have a look at this thing. Referred to as by some people as the banana. I don't like that. To me, the banana will always refer to the Venture. I've heard it referred to as the Space Slug or the Shoehorn. Both of those work quite nicely. This design has actually really grown on me quite a lot. I did a few videos before EVE Echoes launched talking about it. I do like that sort of pagoda-like look on the top. The fact that it is XIAN-YUE in Mandarin does mean half moon. I believe it's half moon. Someone can correct me in the comments, and it is obviously a curved semicircle there. It's a very interesting design, and it does look pretty sweet when it flies through the spaceways of EVE Echoes. And we do know that we'll be getting the Lunar Eclipse skin for it, just like you can get for the XIAN-YUE prototype, and I love this skin. I really do love this skin. It's much more impressive than I thought it was going to be. I love that white and black with those purple accents and teeny little details of gold spangled here and there. It just, to me, that's a really pretty ship, and I'm looking forward to eventually getting to fly one of these on live. Anyway, let's have a look at its attributes and fittings. So the XIAN-YUE Destroyer itself, power grid output of 96 megawatts. That's a sizable power grid and is important, one, because of how aggressively power grid hungry small decomposers are, and it does also actually allow us to fit a couple of oversized modules into the ship, as you'll see later on. For a fitting profile here, we have 3 high slots, 3 mid slots, 4 low slots, 3 power grid rigs and 3 mechanical rigs, or 3 combat rigs and 3 engineering rigs. I need to drill that into my head. Combat and engineering rigs. Anyway, cargo hold capacity 800 cubic meters is pretty solid. It's nice for us to, a decent amount of loot in there. I'll be honest, that attribute profile there, I do think needs a slight change. I think, honestly, that the XIAN-YUE Destroyer does deserve a 4th high slot. I've been using this thing an awful lot on the Fulmination test server, having a lot of fun with this, trying out different things, and on one hand I love it. It's great fun to use. It's an interesting ship in that it has its own unique weapon type and its own unique way of doing things, but I do find that considering this is a faction destroyer, this is theoretically a ship that is going to be more expensive than a faction frigate, it just needs that little extra boost, and I think that could be solved simply by adding a high slot and one other stat, as I'll discuss later on. I think that 4th high slot would really bring the XIAN-YUE into a very powerful position. Looking at its defense, 7,553 isn't huge. It's pretty big for a destroyer, but it's not huge overall. Most of this is in shield and structure. In fact, you've got a shield here of 2,703. Most of that obviously resistances to explosive and kinetic, small amount of thermal resistance there, but with a structure as well of 2,464. The armor Armor is only 1,039. The armor on a XIAN-YUE ship is absolutely atrocious. That is a terrible, terrible armor tank. In fact, there are times in combat where the shield tank has failed and I'm in hull before I've even seen the armor take hits. It's tiny. It's quite funny actually if it weren't so depressing. The capacitor bank, I have to say, is also very aggressive. 1,153 gigajoules is a standard capacitor size, with a very aggressive maximum capacitor recharge rate of 11.77 gigajoules. This actually stays capacitor stable quite easily. It doesn't take much at all to keep this thing stable, which is always a benefit. Maximum lock targets of 8, pretty nice. That's a good amount of lock on that. It's actually more than most cruisers. Signature radius of 39.7 puts this in a very small destroyer or just a large frigate. This really is a ship that, signature radius wise, does come down that little bit towards frigates. And then we have a flight velocity of 248 meters per second. Again, fairly fast. It's not humongously fast, but it's still a nice little speed to have. Finally then, we have the scan resolution of 884, which is monstrous. This ship can lock on at incredibly fast speeds. Scan resolution is brilliant on this thing. If you're going to be using this in a gate camp for pointing, 100% is a viable ship for that. It's right up there with the probe covert ops as one of the fastest lock-on speeds you can get in EVE Echoes. It's got a fairly low mass, but a fairly high inertia modifier, which does cause it some problems later on. Now, I mentioned earlier that I would want to change the high slots, give it a 4th high slot. I would also here like to change one of two things down in this section. Either the signature radius needs to come that touch smaller to I think about 37, 36, or the flight velocity needs to come up just a touch. Ultimately, this is a very speedy little ship, and I would like to see it just have a little bit more combat capability. You can speed tank with it quite nicely, but you'll see it does require us using an oversized module, which thanks to that inertia modifier causes different problems. So perhaps maybe it should be the inertia modifier that needs to change rather, in order to give this thing a much lower inertia and a tighter turning speed. Now, if we move into the trait descriptions, like the XIAN-YUE prototype, we've got a roll bonus here of across the board, 3 different roll bonuses here. We've got an 80% increase to small decomposer damage, which I think is 75% on the XIAN-YUE standard, and then a 25% increase to small decomposer optimal range. Again, that is quite a considerable boost on the, I think it's 15% that the prototype normally gets, plus we've got the +1 warp stability. Now, you'll notice that the plus 15% shield has disappeared from the roll bonus, and I never understood that, because the roll bonus is a flat bonus. That itself doesn't change. I'd never understood why the prototype has plus 15% shield. You may as well just put the extra shield into the tank and be done with it. That's exactly what they've done here with the XIAN-YUE Destroyer itself. It's got a humongous shield to start with. It doesn't need that extra roll bonus. You'll see now, as we go into Advanced Small Decomposer Upgrade, we get an additional 10% Decomposer damage, 50% at full training, 5% Small Decomposer Optimal Range, again 25% additional range at full training, and then Advanced Destroyer Command not only gives us 5% shield, allowing us to increase the already substantial shields by up to another 25% on top, making this an incredibly tanky little destroyer given the right situation, and a 10% increase to warp speed. So again, we can get a 50% increase to warp speed, kind of like a Dramiel, makes this thing very quick for moving from encounter to encounter. Excellent for running encounter, for being an encounter runner, because you can finish a mission nice and quickly due to the amount of damage it can kick out, and then you can just warp around to the next ones nice and easily, nice and quickly, and thus you get a good amount of ISK per hour with this. I'm not complaining that this is a bad ship, it's not, it's a very good ship. I'm just thinking that as a faction destroyer, it should probably be on par with, if not slightly better, due to the fact that it's a destroyer, not a frigate, than the faction frigates. And simply put, the XIAN-YUE is not actually going to take on most of the faction frigates at all. It really struggles against them in PvP. Ultimately, it loses to every single one of them, which is really quite depressing when you consider that the Dramiel is one of the ones I'm talking about there, and that is just not a good ship at the moment on live. The XIAN-YUE being a destroyer, destroyers being designed to kill frigates, the faction destroyer cannot kill any of the faction frigates. That, to me, is a problem, and I think that could be solved by giving it extra firepower in the high slots, possibly giving it extra tracking speed to those turrets, just so that it can actually hit those frigates a little bit better, better considering how pathetic Decomposers are at tracking fast-moving targets. I think having some significant boosts to the tracking speed could also be an excellent way to buff this ship up to a point where I think it could be a real contender and a very dangerous threat. It's still a great ship, as you'll see later on. I just think it should be better than it actually is. Now, before we go in depth to the fitting of the XIAN-YUE itself, I want to give a big thank you and a shout out to Swag Captain. Now, Swag Captain and I had a conversation on the comment section of one of my other Destroyer videos a couple of days back and about the XIAN-YUE, and he actually inspired me to try a couple of different things, and I did end up changing my fit for this video. I'll talk about that in a little bit of time, but thank you, Swag Captain, for that discussion and for that inspiration. Now, for those of you who have looked at everything we've talked about so far, you may be assuming that since Decomposers have a maximum range of 10.8 kilometers, of course we're going to be looking at a Captain Benzie special up close and personal brawling fit, and that's not strictly true. Mainly thanks to the XIAN-YUE itself having bonuses to Decomposer optimal range. You see you've got a couple of bits there, 25% from the roll bonus, 25% for advanced small Decomposer upgrade, plus of course the actual skill training itself gives you that additional range also. This means that my small Decomposers actually have an optimal range of 21.09 kilometers, and that's theoretically where we want to try and stay. This, of course, is mainly due to the tracking speed of Decomposers being otherwise utterly abysmal. We want to be at our maximum range so that we have a low angular velocity for the most part against our targets. It's enough for us to handle that, but we can come in close if we do have something that we need to speed tank against, and you'll see me do this in the combat section later on. Now, what we're looking at here is also the exact reason why I think that the XIAN-YUE needs some kind of buff. For PvE, it's an excellent ship. It is definitely capable of doing some very high tier content, again, as you'll see later, but in regards to PvP, I kind of feel that a destroyer, which is a ship that is designed to be a frigate killer, if a faction destroyer cannot take out faction frigates, that is kind of a problem. And the main reason with that is simply that if you are up against a faction frigate, your damage isn't high enough to alpha them off grid before they get within range. Once they are within range, your tracking speed is so abysmal that you're not actually able to stay on them. Beyond that as well, the ship itself with that inertia modifier and its slightly lower speed does struggle to maintain any form of range against a target. That just means that the frigates are able to control the fight and they will rip apart a XIAN-YUE. It's kind of depressing when you think of it that way. Now, if you were to give the XIAN-YUE a fourth high slot, you'd be adding 33% to this DPS, which takes us to about 549. I don't think that's an unreasonable amount of damage for a faction destroyer to be able to do if you're fully skilled out into every skill that it could possibly use. To me, that's within acceptable parameters. Now, as I said, I would also like to see perhaps an increase to the speed, a drop to the inertia modifier, or perhaps boosts to the tracking speed of the Jetstream Decomposers. Those would also fix the situation for me and allow this very powerful ship to just complete slightly higher tier content. Right now, it cannot do Tech 10 storyline encounters at all. It just gets ripped apart by them. It can do some of the lower ones, but I'd like to see it be able to do slightly higher content than it can do, and I think making those changes of adding an extra high slot and then possibly one or multiple of the either extra flight speed, a lower inertia modifier, or bonuses to the tracking speed of the Decomposers could really help this ship out. But anyway, let's actually talk about the fit. So of course, yes, we've gone for small Jetstream Decomposers in the high slots. In regards to this as well, as I said, tracking speed is going to be a major consideration for us. So in the mid slots, a Predator Stasis Webifier and a Predator Warp Scrambler give us the capability of slowing a target down. Obviously the Warp Scrambler can switch off a micro warp drive, whereas the Stasis Webifier slows down the flight velocity. This means that you can slow a ship right down to a grinding halt, whether it's got an afterburner or a micro warp drive, and you can then track it comfortably and be able to actually apply the damage there from those Decomposers quite comfortably, get rid of those targets, and then move back out to range. Now, the third slot I've gone for here is very much a mixed bag. Personally, I've gone for a Vriglarkus Small Energy Nosferatu. This allows me to leech. What I mean by that is I can go into a target, something big like a battleship, and I can orbit it nice and closely, bring my capacitor bank right the way back up to top quickly, ready for the next wave, and so on and so forth. It means I don't have to worry about capacitor stability at all. That said, if you want to lean into the speed tanking side of things, 100% you could swap out things like the tracking disruptors or guidance disruptors into here as well, just to mean you take even less damage in combat. Now you see later on, I do stuff and I take very little damage without those, but if you want to go for those higher tier anomalies, that does become a consideration, something you might like to look into. Now, in regards to the low slots, I've put on here a veteran small shield booster. Put a little pin in that, we'll come back to that in a moment, and an Enterprise Adaptive Invulnerability Field. Now of course this is to repair any damage that our shields take, and we've got the Invulnerability Field there to mean that our shields take less damage overall. We are mainly going to be speed tanking, thanks to the small signature radius of the ship, but any damage we do take we can reduce with the Adaptive Invulnerability Field, and repair with quick bursts of the small shield booster. Now the reason I say we're going to be speed tanking is because we have a medium afterburner. Now I'm not normally a fan of fitting oversized prop modules to ships. Simply put, yes, you get a massive flight velocity adjustment out of this, but it also comes at a massive increase to the weight. That means with that inertia modifier already being high, you have a ship that is incredibly cumbersome. It takes a long time to reach maximum speed, it takes a long time to decelerate, and your capability of turning and aligning is severely impacted as well, which means you can struggle to maintain orbit. Fortunately, thanks to the range of the Decomposers now being up at 21 kilometers, this doesn't matter too much, as it can actually hold that orbit quite comfortably, and it's going fast enough to be reducing damage. I like to basically, during the fight, I'm anywhere between 10 kilometers and 20 kilometers away, depending on what I'm fighting, and this will maintain orbits comfortably at either of those, with enough speed tank to not be taking supreme damage. This does also give us one final low slot spare, which I've gone for a returned macro particle stabilizer, the weapon upgrade module, additional damage bonus, faster activation time. Then you can activate this. When it's activated, you get an even bigger boost to the activation time adjustment and extra damage on top of that as well. Now, in regards to what we're looking at here, the 412 shoots up to about 516. Now, again, if I got my way and increased the top slots to 5 and we had 549 DPS to standard, that would mean that with the macro particle stabilizer active, the XIAN-YUE would actually achieve higher than 620 DPS, which to me again is completely acceptable. This is a faction destroyer. That's kind of the damage I would like to see it doing. Now remember I said put a pin in the shield booster here. Now if you were to swap back to a small afterburner and just go with a small afterburner, or if you wanted to use a micro warp drive, I wouldn't recommend a micro warp drive by the way, definitely stick with a small afterburner, you can actually swap out the small shield booster for a medium shield booster quite comfortably, or indeed you can pop on medium shield extenders, which is a little bit more useful for PvP. In fact, in PvP I would tend to swap out swap this out for the medium version, have a medium shield booster, stick with the standard afterburner, and then instead of the additional DPS from the macro particle stabilizer, you can pop a damage control in there as well. Or heck, you can even swap out the adaptive invulnerability field for the damage control, buy yourself those 13 seconds of time against your opponent, hopefully obliterate them in that time, and then pull away to safety, either if you don't manage to kill them in that time, or, well, if you've killed them, then it's all well and good, isn't it? Now, in regards to the rigs, on the combat rigs on the left-hand side here, I've gone for Decomposer Burst Aerators. Having 2 of these is the biggest DPS increase. That is a bigger DPS increase than having a collision accelerator and a burst aerator. This again is something that I'm actually discovering quite a lot recently, and it's something I think the developers need to address. There's very little reason to ever go for a collision accelerator over a burst aerator. In fact, it's only once you get to the 3 rigs. If you go for 2 burst aerators and a collision accelerator, that is higher than 3 burst aerators, but not by a huge amount. Now, ultimately, the only reason currently to fit a collision accelerator is if you need all of that damage in one hit. If, for example, you're in a sniper build and you need your first volley to be the one that matters most, that's when you go for a collision accelerator. Otherwise, burst aerators are just flat out better. So I would like to see the developers increase the damage boost afforded by a collision accelerator just a little bit. For the 3rd slot here, I've gone for a core defense charge economizer. This gives an increase to the amount of shield boost that my small shield booster does. Again, you could, if you're going for PvP, this is where I would swap in an electromagnetic shield extender extender, the one that increases your resistances against electromagnetic damage, or indeed just the one that makes your shields bigger. The reason I've gone for the core defense charge economizer is because I like to have the extra amount of shield boost that I would otherwise have had from having that medium shield booster fitted, but from a small shield booster. Now, in regards to the engineering rigs, I've gone for auxiliary thrusters. There we are, 2 of those, and a polycarbon engine housing. The auxiliary thrusters give me that additional speed, which helps us in regards to speed tanking, and remember, any additional speed that the auxiliary thrusters give is then multiplied when we activate the afterburner, and then the polycarbon engine housing is a massive reduction to that inertia modifier, and theoretically I would almost consider swapping an auxiliary thruster out for a second polycarbon engine housing to really push down that inertia modifier. It's not huge though, the difference between the two really isn't huge, and I honestly think with the testing I did, the auxiliary thrusters does come out just on top, although I did personally prefer the feel of the polycarbon engine housing, but that might just be because I am a frigate pilot normally, so I have smaller, nimbler ships, whereas having that medium afterburner really does, like, it means your ship becomes cumbersome as all heck. It feels like flying a cruiser at that point, and that to me is always problematic. But it's not a problem with the ship, that's just a problem with me as a pilot. Now, in order to showcase this one in action, I'm going to take the XIAN-YUE Destroyer into AI Awakening Expert, which is a Tech 10 combat encounter. Just to showcase that this can do this quite comfortably, I'm jumping in at 30 kilometers. Now, rather than my usual annotated approach to this where I tell you blow by blow everything I'm doing on screen, what I'm actually going to do this time is I'm going to step back, just let the footage do its thing, you guys can watch and see the XIAN-YUE in action and make up your own opinions and mind on it. Anyway, with that said, let me know in your thoughts and opinions in the comment section down below what you think of this ship. Do you agree that you think it needs a boost? Do you think that it's already powerful enough as it is? How would you like to see them add this to the game? What kind of concepts do you have for how you'll actually get a XIAN-YUE Destroyer of your own? That said and done then, folks, enjoy the rest of the footage. I'll see you at the end. Happy sailing, and see you in New Eden.